Hello again, everybody, and welcome back. And please welcome my guest, Dani Ahn or Ahn. How do you pronounce your last name
It's
in an English
on.
accent?
So in English, when we say you're on direct, it means you're the one asking the questions. And so it's a
I
play on my
see.
name, Dani on direct.
Oh, I love it. Okay. I thought Ahn was just your last name, so I've just been calling you Dani Ahn. I didn't realize it was because it's Ahn direct. I get it now. That makes
Yes,
sense.
it's a
Well,
fun play.
thank you and welcome to my channel, and also hello to all of your subscribers. If you're watching on my channel, go and check out Dani's channel. There's a link in the description. This is actually I just came off a live stream because I had some news to break, so people might get sick of my voice already. So I'm glad I've got someone else to talk to. But you are a lawyer in the States, and you know a lot about cults and groups of high demand, control groups, that sort of thing, and the law specifically, because you did a breakdown on the Leah Remini harassment case that I saw, and I was like, I've got to speak to this person about this because I'd love to break this down further with you. So is that a decent introduction?
I think that's perfectly fine. Yes, I am a practicing attorney out of the state of Utah. We do divide up whether or not you can practice in different jurisdictions based on state. So I'm licensed here, and I'm also licensed in Arizona, although my license is not active there because I'm not going to pay the fees if I'm not living there. So, but yes, I am a civil law attorney, and this is kind of my bread and butter. So although I've never challenged one of these high demand religions myself, legally speaking, it's always interesting to read through the challenges and the way in which they craft their pleadings and how they can hold some of these people accountable for really atrocious and what would otherwise be considered harassment, assault, undue influence, any of those other things that seem to get a pass when it's a high demand religion.
Yes.
So it's fascinating to see that line between free expression of religion and also respecting people's individual rights and privacy and you name it. So
Yeah, I think I found it so because I stumbled across your channel when Leah Remini had filed her harassment case against the Church of Scientology and Dave Miscavige's leader. And just for those of you on Danny's channel watching, hi, I'm Apostate Alex. I'm a former Scientologist. I used to work for the church in London as their director of public book sales. So I was in charge of getting new people into Scientology. And now I speak about my experiences, and I have a website called Scientology Business, which is looking at the legal matters, the finances, and all of this sort of stuff that's going on in Scientology. And I came across your channel, Dani, and I was like, wow, this is so interesting because firstly, I'm learning a lot about US law, which is very different to UK law. And secondly, just you were going through the complaint that Leah made, literally word and line by line, word by word, and explaining what it means to people. And I found it so interesting learning about the way the US legal system works with respect to Scientology, because it is such a fine line, because you have a clear definition of, freedom of religion and freedom of belief, which Scientology is protected by over there, which we don't have over here. So it's just a fascinating thing. And I'm really eager to hear your thoughts on it.
well, and there's also disclosure laws that are very different, is my understanding. In the UK, you may not be taxed as a religious entity, depending on, the structure of your entity, is my understanding. But there isn't quite the same shield in terms
Mm,
of not disclosing how much your organization is earning in the UK. So it's always interesting to see these global religions and organizations try to shield their tax liability by disclosing how much is being earned in other countries and funneling it there, or funneling it away from there, bringing it back to the United States so that no one sees exactly how much money the organization has.
mhm.
The exception being, of course, the Catholics in Rome. They're not answering to anybody. The same is true here in the United States for most religions. And so most religious organizations want to be based here, is my presumption, at least.
Yeah, the tax law is completely different in the UK. So Scientology isn't a tax exempt religious organization in the United Kingdom, because in order to be tax exempt, you have to prove you have a public benefit in the UK.
Mm.
And they failed to do that in 1999, so they're not tax exempt. The Charity Commission basically said you can't prove that you benefit the public, and therefore you can't, be tax exempt. So they operate through an Australian registered charity that operates only in the UK, and then all of the money then gets funneled up to the US church. And you can see this in their accounts, because as a charity in Australia, or if they were to get tax exemption in the UK, they would have to show exactly how much money they're spending on what, where the money goes, how much money they've earned and raised. So yeah, it is a lot more open, and you're more accountable, I think, if you're a charity here. But it's the opposite in America, right?
Pretty much, yeah. And there's reasons for that. Obviously, we want to respect religious practices and the benefits of religion and what it gives to society. There's a presumption that all religion has a net benefit to society. And
Mm,
so, in order to protect that and protect people's religious expression, which tithing would fall under, right? Because you're following a commandment for those who believe that. You're basically doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing in and so, should you be taxed on that? I don't think that they should be, in my personal opinion. And the reason for that is because those funds are already taxed, right? They're already taxed through income tax, depending on your jurisdiction, through property tax, etc. And what you do with your money and how you want to gift it back to society, whether that goes to a church, a nonprofit, etc. I don't think that should be taxed. But
mm,
that's my own personal opinion. I'm also of the vein of taxation is theft. So that just to put a little bit of my own bias out there. I'll be
mm.
honest, I am biased in that opinion, but I do believe in transparency. And I would like to see the laws change in terms of what is disclosed in terms of religious organizations and et cetera within the United States, because where there's transparency, there's enforcement. So a lot of times, and I'm curious, did Scientology have this where it has basically two entities, one which is a nonprofit and another which is profit based? And did one of those entities feed into the other in your experience?
Yeah, so Scientology operate through hundreds of shell companies registered all over the world. And my understanding is that in the US as a whole, the church has tax exemption. There are some companies called like the Church of Spiritual Technology, which is the overarching thing that, is the kind of upper management level of Scientology. And then there's the Religious Technology Center, then there's the Church of Scientology International, and so on. They're all tax exempt, but there are some for profits in there, especially in the UK. I recently uncovered actually that there's a company called Nesta Investments Limited, which is in the UK, and they own property and it's a for profit company. But they only own property that's Scientology property, and they lease it back to the church. So the church pay rent for it. And also there's some money going, and the directors of this company, by the way, are all Scientology executives. And then there's also money going back and forth. So Church Scientology International loans money to the UK church to the tune of $100 million. The UK church then pay it back with interest, which means the tax exempt Church of Scientology International is profiting off loaning an overseas entity money. And questions like this, I don't know whether that's legal. And if it is, it's certainly ethically questionable.
Well, and it sounds legal, and that's
Mm,
the thing, right? And that's why I say I think a level of transparency that is missing here would go a long way in resolving some of the technicalities here, because at least in the United States, the LDS Church actually just got fined a pretty penny. They came to an agreement with SEC and with the FTC because they failed to disclose that they were funneling money through a private investment firm. So the private investment arm of the church was basically mixing some funds there between what was tithing and non-tithing, what was tax exempt, what was non-tax exempt. And because of that mix up in non-disclosure, and according to the according to the agreement that was signed, okay, as part of basically what is considered a plea deal. Do you know what a plea deal, the
yes.
concept
Yeah.
of that is?
Yeah.
It's very similar. So you can come to an agreement with the agency saying, yes, we did bad, give us a slap on the wrist. And that's exactly what they'll do. Well, they basically admitted in this order from the court that there was a systemic attempt to hide the for-profit funds going into the nonprofit entity and the nonprofit funds going into the for-profit entity. And they also systemically hid the shell companies that they had established as well, to try and funnel cash in and out of other countries and in and out of those entities. So that's all admitted to within their own agreement. But if you mention that, obviously most people who are members will come back and say, well, that's just good business, right? And it's like, okay, so are you a business then? You're right, I don't disagree with you. So is that good
Yeah.
business, or is that crafty legal speak for it's mine and I don't want to share it and I don't want you to know and you don't have the right to know, which is not true, at
Yeah.
least in our laws. So and it's also kind of counterintuitive because I don't know how Scientology operates. I don't know all of their belief structure, but at least with the LDS Church, we're Christian, and we tout ourselves as Christians. And in the Bible, Jesus Christ is very, very clear. He says, "Render unto Caesar's what is Caesar's, and unto God what is God's."
It's like the opposite in Scientology, where the belief is get all of the money you can and keep it. There's actually a policy in in Scientology where L. Ron Hubbard, the founder, wrote, "The purpose of an organization, as in like a church, is to make money, make more money, and make more money." But the idea behind it is to then protect and preserve the technology for future generations. So the idea is by having lots of money going in the church, then they can invest in more buildings and assets and spend more money protecting and then have longevity. So the idea is kind of good, but the policy very much is to make money.
Right.
It's fascinating what you say about the LDS Church and their moving of money and shell companies and stuff, because it sounds almost identical to how Scientology are operating and have done for years. In the UK, if you're tax exempt, your accounts are publicly accessible documents because there's that level of accountability there. In the US, they're not. But does that mean they can avoid scrutiny? Like, are their accounts and stuff filed and looked at by the government and stuff, or not at all?
So there is very mild oversight with
Right.
religious organizations. You basically tell the IRS at the end of the day, "Hey, here's our disclosures. We didn't earn any income," or I mean the IRS isn't all that interested in income of the respective religious organizations, right? Because it's not income for tax purposes. So you don't
Okay.
really you're not at fault for not disclosing the amounts. And you don't have a legal requirement to disclose the amounts publicly. I don't know whether or not you need to disclose them privately to the IRS. So
Mm,
I'll tell you right there, I don't know that answer. But what
mm,
I do know is that you are not required to disclose it publicly. And I know at least in other countries, even if you disclose it through the agency, you can actually request the agency record and make it public, which
right.
is not something you could do here as to the LDS Church. So, for example, we didn't know that the LDS Church had $100 billion in liquid assets, but for one of the investors who had disclosed that through a whistleblower process. And there was a lot of, to do about that. And everybody said, oh, he's a liar. He's a liar. Well, he came bearing receipts, because at least when you whistleblow to the IRS, if you are found to have been correct in your whistleblowing and that organization did hide funds or did try and, evade taxes, you're entitled to, I think, 10% is the reward you get for tattling. So do you remember this with the
Mhm.
THOT audit?
No, I don't know what
So
that
back
is.
in 2017 or 2016, I can't recall which, there was a whole 4chan movement to basically go after these OnlyFans accounts
Right.
and say they're not paying their taxes, which most of them were not. And if you reported it to the IRS and it turns out that person wasn't paying their taxes or was engaged in some type of evasive behavior, you would be entitled to a reward.
Oh, wow.
And so it was called the Great THOT Audit. And
Wow, I
I
had
don't
no
know if
idea
we
about
can
this.
say that word on YouTube yet or
I
not.
don't know, but
I
yeah, let's
recall
play
there
safe than
was some
sorry.
kind of protection there, but,
Right.
yeah, that hoe over there audit, and it's hilarious. I mean, but there are serious legal consequences to this type of behavior. It's interesting to see it happening. I mean, I guess it's not all that interesting because every business does it, every entity does it, almost every religious organization does it. So I'm not going to sit here and point fingers and say, "Oh, Scientology is bad for doing it. The LDS Church is bad for doing it. The Roman Church is doing the Roman Catholic Church is bad for doing it." Everybody does it, and
Mhm.
it is. It's good business sense. It's good sense. So
I
I don't
think
know.
it just comes down to the idea of ethics, right? And why they're doing it. And Scientology, so in Scientology, there's different levels of there's parishioner, and then there's a staff member, and then there's the C organization, who are the people who have dedicated their lives to work for the church, kind of like monks and nuns in another religion. And for staff members in Sea Org, they are considered the most ethical people on planet Earth in Scientology. That's what a Scientologist is. So when you look at these sorts of questions, it becomes a question of ethics. And I think it's
Mm.
interesting if we look back historically. Do you know how Scientology got tax exemption in the first place? Because if you don't, the story is wild.
I recall something about boats. I recall something about multiple lawsuits and appeals. That I recall. I remember that there was like 2 serious pushes legally to get the tax exempt status, and that there were multiple lawsuits against the IRS that did it make it up to the Supreme Court? I remember one of them made it up to the upper appeals court, and they won at that level, but I could be wrong. So you tell me. That's all I recall.
So, in a nutshell, they had their tax exemption because they're a religion when Oral Hubbard was still alive, and then they got it removed, and then they got it back again, and then it got removed again, basically, for various reasons. Oral Hubbard was to be found to be personally profiting from funds donated to the church and so on, but essentially it got taken away, and then many years went by. I think it was like 20 years or something, where Scientology were like, well, we don't think we should pay taxes because we're a religion. So they weren't paying taxes, and their tax bill got to something like $1 billion or something like this that would have been hugely impactful for the church. So their future relied on getting tax exemption. If they did not get tax exemption in 1993, it probably would have been the end of Scientology because they hadn't paid taxes in so long. Now, they were under investigation. The IRS was saying you need to pay taxes and so on. So Scientology engaged in a campaign of harassment, which is one of the things that they do as part of their Office of Special Affairs, and filed literally thousands of lawsuits against the IRS, the SEC, and individual members in like people who work for the IRS. To the point where it's called Operation Snow White, and it was well, that was one operation, and then there was this other, which is I'll get into that
Racist.
later.
No, I'm just kidding.
No,
So
no.
so
Well,
why was
this
it
was
called Operation Snow
well, this
White?
was a different campaign of harassment. I probably mentioned
Oh,
that too
okay.
early.
Okay.
This other one was basically thousands of lawsuits against the IRS and its members, and it was the largest infiltration of. So Operation Snow White was the largest infiltration of U.S. government in history, which is where Scientologists infiltrated the government to get all these tax documents and so on, and get information on Scientology and the investigations and so on. And then separate to that was the operation where they filed thousands of lawsuits. And I believe it became the most litigious um, company or organization in US history or something, because there were thousands of lawsuits going against personal staff members. David Miscavige, leader of the church, basically walked into the IRS building one day and demanded a meeting with whoever the head honcho was and said, hey, you know, all of this can stop. If you just give us tax exemption, all of these thousands of lawsuits will be just pulled tomorrow. And they caved, and they gave them tax exemption, and they pulled all the lawsuits. So that's how they got tax exemption in 1993, and
I'm
why
gonna
they're
try
still taxed
that.
them today.
I'm gonna try that. You know, we have a word for that. It's called a vexatious litigant, and
Yes.
I'm pretty sure that term probably came or was developed after this movement.
I wouldn't be
Wow.
surprised. Yeah. So they did the largest
Wow.
infiltration of US government, which is Operation Snow White, and then they had the thousands of lawsuits. Overall, they were just putting huge pressure on the government, and they just caved, and they were like, please make it stop. And they said, okay.
Jeez. That's
Yeah.
crazy. So that's right on par with you said, the Office of Special Operation Agent? What was it that you said?
OSA. So OSA is the Office of Special Affairs, which is the
That's it.
department of people who like the dirty tricks department in Scientology.
So, here's my question to you, I suppose. When Leah Remini went to the headquarters or to that compound where she was basically held and endured, in her attorney's words, psychological torture, which based on what she has claimed in the complaint, given it, presuming that's true or that there's some truth to that, it does fit the bill for psychological torture. My question is at the end of that, are you required to sign an NDA? And do you sign NDAs as a member of Scientology throughout the progression within the religion? Because knowing that it is as litigious as it is, and knowing that they use legal terms, and I can only imagine that the part of the doctrine, as it were, or truth, or whatever is being taught in Scientology to its members, I would imagine that they're all basically being taught how to avoid litigation against themselves or their families,
Mhm,
or
mhm.
against, more importantly, the organization. And so, what was your experience? Do you know if that was happening? If that is a possibility?
There are bunches of contracts you have to sign, especially if you work for the church as a staff member. Now, as a parishioner, you don't really sign because you don't sign a commitment or anything like that, but you may have to sign things throughout your journey. For example, there's one thing where if there's a certain level of Scientology you reach where you learn the crazy space alien Xenu story that everyone's heard of that we can talk about later if you want. But essentially, when you get to those upper operating Thetan levels, you sign a document that says you will pay, I think it's like $10,000 or $100,000 for every disclosure you make of these secret materials. And I think widely they've been proven to be non-enforceable in the courts because it's like a spiritual commitment and it's kind of insane. Um, and so there are things like that that Leah would have signed. But I think the main thing is if she signed an internal arbitration agreement, which one of the harassment cases against the church that's ongoing at the moment, was actually sent back to arbitration because the person had signed basically a clause that said if you ever come into any sort of issue or disagreement with the church, you agree that it will be solved by the church by internal arbitration before and not go to court basically. And it was ruled recently that that clause is enforceable even after someone has left Scientology. So his big
Really?
harassment case has been sent back. Yeah, because I think the ruling was, I mean, I don't have it in front of me, and so I'm not quoting it directly, but my understanding is that because the disagreement happened while this person was a member, even though they're now out of the group, she has to still abide by this clause in the contract, which I think is horrible because this person's gone through this traumatic experience and is claiming that she was, trafficked as a child and these horrible things going on. And the courts say you have to go back to that group and sort it out with them.
And is this a UK court
This
that
is a
upheld it?
US case.
Really?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
would be, if you recall the name or if it comes to your mind, please send it to me.
I'll send you the documents. Yeah,
I'd be
they're
very
all publicly
interested.
accessible.
I'll tell you, I'm wondering if it was filed out of the state of California, because the California courts are very reluctant to throw away arbitration agreements. If they can catch you on arbitration, they'll be like, "Good, go to arbitration," because it frees up the court calendar. It frees up resources within the court. And their assumption is, look, lady, if you signed on to this, that was your choice. You elected to do this. You thought this was a good idea. You must have, for one reason or another, thought that was the way to go. And in some cases, there is a role for arbitration. I'm a huge fan of arbitration and alternative dispute resolution in cases involving transactions, right? So if there's a dispute about a contract or between companies or you name it, I think arbitration is appropriate. Where I find arbitration less helpful is in consumer product liability cases and in personal injury cases, in medical and dental or mental health malpractice cases, And obviously, I'm a fan of arbitration in legal malpractice cases, but those I find arbitration can be helpful in those certain circumstances. I don't find it helpful in others, and I don't think that this is a case where arbitration, in my opinion, the provision should have been upheld, because I think there's issues of undue influence. I think there's issues of duress, and you can have these contracts be held to be unenforceable as a result of that,
Mhm.
if it was signed under duress.
Yeah, I think that from my memory, that is the case that was being made, was that it was signed under duress and so on. But what Scientology do is, and this person was a staff member, is they get you to sign this contract multiple times throughout your journey as a staff member in Scientology. So the case was,
Mm,
well, were you under duress every single time? Because you signed this
right.
contract 5 times over 10 years. There's no way you can be under duress. And I think this is one of the problems, is maybe the court or the US legal system not understanding, or I don't know, the concept of coercive control. Because if you are being manipulated, lied to, and coerced by a group over an extended period of time, then you're going to think differently. You're going to behave differently to when you come out of that group. And you may not even be aware of it at the time. And I wonder if maybe it's a question of the US legal system not understanding how that works, because it's quite a new concept in terms of like understanding from a psychology perspective, you know? What do you
Right.
think?
Well, and I think in her particular case, because she was an employee of the organization, or at least they could claim she was an employee of the organization, as a result of that, you're also looking at employment issues. And that is ripe for arbitration. And I agree with you. I don't think that any legal system has really been prepared to deal with coercive organizations and groups. And I say any legal system. Because it doesn't matter if it's a coercive group like Disney, right? And we'll be talking about that this weekend. We'll talk a little bit about corporate cults, is what I call them,
Hmm.
and it's where, the I think if you're ever in a position where the organization or the company can do no wrong, and only you can, right? It's not the problem with the organization; it's a problem with you, and where you're constantly questioning yourself. You're not really a fully fledged individual at that point. At a certain point, you abandon that individuality, and it's very hard from a legal standpoint to notice when that occurs and where it occurs.
Hmm.
And the law is really very, it likes cut and dry. It really does. It likes firm answers. It likes to know the status of each party. It wants to know, how to make things right, especially in a contract dispute. And that's why I ask about contracts, because the remedy in a contract typically is not um, punitive. The remedy in a contract is typically you're looking to try and make the other party whole. So as if the contract were to be satisfied. And with employment contracts, that's pretty straightforward and easy to do. With contracts that involve services plus employment plus, your adherence to the group, that's where things start to get messy. I could see a court easily taking provisions of the contract and just striking them and saying, we're not dealing with this, we're not dealing with that, this is unenforceable, this is unenforceable. These aspects are enforceable, but it never truly makes the litigant whole when your entire identity, your friendship group, your life, your support, your finances are all tied to the organization. No, I don't think there is a single government in the world that can account for that. And I don't know, frankly, how you would.
Yeah.
That's the
There,
difficulty.
there are some really interesting points in the comments I'm seeing here, and there are some super chats that were made earlier that we'll come to at the
Oh,
end, I
okay. Go
think.
ahead
But
and read them out.
there's one here that's particularly relevant. It's a Free Zenu project, a Farsec. He's a regular viewer of me, or she, I don't know, a regular viewer. Thank you for joining. Thank you for the super chat. Danny, you have to remember about Scientology arbitration is it didn't exist, and in most of the most of the people that signed these were as young as 13 years old and were not given a choice. Now, to give you some context on this, there isn't a thing in Scientology called arbitration. Like, there isn't an arbitration process. There isn't anything in policy or the way things are done that caters for this. They've just stuck it in as a legal clause to cover their backs in case something happens in the future. And
Right.
now they've come to this and they've fought in court that you've signed this thing, you have to go back to arbitration. There isn't an arbitration process when she gets back to the church. And yeah, signing as young as 13 years old, a lot of Scientology staff members, people who are raised in the group, are forced to sign these 1 billion-year contracts dedicating their life to Scientology as a minor. So those are
Well,
two things to consider.
if you watch my Little Mermaid episode where I review the contract there, I speak specifically about minority. And I'm saying, look, when you're at least in my jurisdiction, if you're a minor and you're contracting for funsy things, right? Like things you don't really need, guess what? You get to renege on that contract. You can just walk away. You can
Mm.
walk away and you're not liable to the contract.
But
However, if
isn't the
you're
rule you
contracting
have
as
to
a
do that
minor, sorry,
before
go ahead.
like the sorry, isn't the idea you have to do that before the age of 19 or something though? Like if you continue working for the church for 30 years, you can't go back on it. That was my understanding.
I think it just depends on the jurisdiction, to be
Right,
honest. It depends
right.
on where you're signing. So, I mean, at least in my state, it's likely that that contract would be null and void based on the age of 13. It really does depend. It depends heavily on the jurisdiction and where you live. And I find it very duplicitous to be saying, oh, well, we're going to agree to internal arbitration or some type of mediation with an arbitrator that's appointed by the church. It just seems incredibly inequitable, and I could see a court fashioning their own ruling saying, "Yeah, no, we're not gonna read into the contract what's not there." However, where the bargaining power of the parties is so inequitable, we're going to appoint a third-party arbitrator, or we're going to require that you do so. So they can even go in and strike those smaller provisions within the contract. But that's hard. I'm sorry. I really am. I wish that we had a legal system that accounted for those types of things. But beyond the majority and minority laws and beyond the laws dealing with equity and the inequality of the parties and bargaining power, I don't know. And then the conscionability aspect of it, right? Which is why the billion-year contracts are usually thrown out. And probably why they've limited it to having you re-sign every 5 years. Not only does that avoid the issue of duress and undue influence, it also avoids the issue of having unconscionable clauses in the contract. So I'll give you an example with a non-compete, for example. You need to, let's say that I hire you, okay, as a contractor. I want you to come here and sell books. I want you to be a marketer and a distributor for me. And I pay you to do that. And as part of the agreement, I say you can't work with anyone else within 25 miles of where I am and for the next 3 years after we terminate our
Sure.
contract. That's a very enforceable type contract. Our courts are really reluctant to go 3 years, but definitely 2. And so if you're pushing on 3 and you have a time and space, it's limited, the court will say, yeah, that makes sense. We can enforce that. But if instead I say, you can't contract with anyone after working with me, right? Or anyone in the industry, or you can't contract for 100 years, that's where the courts are very happy to throw things that are ridiculous like that out.
Sure. There's actually a really good super chat here. Tassie Devil, another regular viewer. Thank you for the super chat. Ask Dani what she thinks about minors signing a billion-year contract. That's exactly what we were just saying, right?
I think it's morally duplicitous and evil
Mm.
because you're imbuing fear into that minor child, and you're creating a situation where you're trying to avoid litigation later on down the road by basically making the litigant believe that that's their rights, that they signed away their rights. What's the point in trying to find an attorney? What's the point in trying to bring forward the issue? I'm going to lose, and it creates this internal conflict that prohibits people from asserting their legal rights.
There's also a level in your mind, like I can speak to this because I signed my 1 billion-year contract. There's a when I signed it, I remember thinking, there's no way this is legally enforceable, but it almost doesn't matter because it's a spiritual commitment and it's kind of actually it holds more gravity inside of you when you sign this
Mhm.
thing because you're not just signing a legal document that almost is irrelevant. It's actually I'm signing up to something here for my eternity, not just this life, but all future lives. I'm dedicating
Right,
to Scientology. That's how much I believe in this thing or how much I think this is the right thing to do. So,
right.
actually, in your head, to go back on that contract, whether or not it's legally enforceable, is a huge thing to go through in your mind, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's why you don't see a lot of class action lawsuits against these religious organizations in particular, because it's going to the very fiber of who you are. It's saying, as part of who I am contracting my life, my soul, my dedication, my energy, my time, my thoughts, everything that I am is intrinsically tied to this organization. And again, when you're in that state of mind, the organization can do no wrong. And so you're thinking to yourself before you sign, I'd imagine, you're thinking, well, if I ever breach the contract, that would be on me. That would be my failure. I would never go back on this. The church would never harm me like that. The organization would never seek to destroy me. And so yeah, I'd imagine that's very, very difficult.
Are you familiar of the phrase in Scientology, pulling it in?
No, teach me.
So in Scientology, the I'll explain it to you in a way that a Scientologist would, right? You are an immortal spiritual being, right? With more power, ability, control, than you can ever imagine, right? You are more than just your body and your mind. You're a spiritual being, right?
Oh, I like how this feels. Okay, keep
So
talking.
sounds great, right? So
Yeah.
therefore, you are in control of your environment, right? So everything that goes on, you are responsible, and Scientology is supposed to give you the tools to make you more able to control the environment you're in and therefore live a happier existence. The downside of this is, well, if you're responsible for everything in your environment, why would you put yourself in an environment where X would happen to you, right? If you're abused, or the R word, or SA, or, the victim of a crime or theft, or, someone beats you up or whatever, they don't deny that happened to you. They go, yes, that happened to you, but there's obviously something wrong with you, because as a spiritual being, you thought the best course of action was to put yourself in a situation where you'd allow that to happen. And
Yep.
that's called pulling it in.
Interesting. So in the organization that I was a part of, there is a doctrinal, it's not doctrinal per se, but there was a talk that was given about forgiveness and abusers, specifically in domestic abuse and SA. And it was heavily inferred that the victim also must have done something to repent of, and that they should also talk to their bishop about going through the repentance process. And as a matter of fact, the uh, the P prints that I talk about on my channel, that case is very interesting, and I'm meeting with some of the victims uh, this weekend to discuss that case.
Wow.
My presumption that the bishop had some involvement was correct, was absolutely correct in shielding the
Wow.
perpetrator. And so it is a serious problem, and this happens in almost any large organization, but specifically in high demand organizations.
Yeah.
They will put in place measures or belief structures that make you question yourself as the victim and make you silence you in every
Yeah.
way possible. And will constantly make you question your own thinking, right? Because that's part of the control, is thought control. You know, am I thinking correctly? Are my thoughts aligned? Am I off? Is one of the things we say very frequently out here. And in your case, it's you have to pull it in. You have to take accountability and responsibility for the harm that you created in your own world and the
Yeah.
tragedies that you designed around you. I have the same issue with the karma cycle, this concept of, if you're born poor or anything bad happens to you, it's because of something you did in the past. I have the same issue with oh, what is that doctrine called? The law of the harvest, right? So if you're a good person, God will take care of you, and God will provide, and God will do these things for you. And the people who are rich are really just blessed, good people who are doing good things. I
Mm.
have issues with all of those doctrines because it places the blame of really tragic events and tragedy that happens in the world on the victim every time.
Mhm. It's a balance, isn't it, of like wanting getting so religious groups provide hope and provide, the element of faith of, there's something better. Sometimes it's good to kind of surrender and be like, you know what, sometimes things just happen, And there's also a balance of being responsible for your actions and being accountable. But the problem with high control groups is it takes it to a totalitarian level of one way or the other, right? And I don't think it would be fair to say, oh, things just happen to a victim of abuse or something. That is someone else's wrongdoing, and that person needs to be accountable for that. And that shouldn't have happened to you, is the
Yes.
response that should be given. Not, oh, well, if you pray for forgiveness or you forgive your abuser or whatever, it's very empowering to be able to do that, but it shouldn't have happened in the first place. And
Well,
you are a
yeah.
victim. You shouldn't be feel like you're responsible for it because you did nothing wrong.
But again, it comes back to the organization can do no wrong,
Mm,
right? So
yes.
so it's never the organization's fault. It's there's just bad members in every organization, and you can't blame those bad members for the whole. And it's like, okay, but are we going to deny any responsibility for what the organization actively covered up or actively was involved in, or was, basically creating harassment campaigns to silence victims so they don't assert their rights, and then the statute of limitations to whole and they avoid all liability? We're going to pretend that's not happening too, I suppose. Right?
I think that links in here. Tassido has a really good question. Danny just stated it in a lawyerly way, but the US courts have not stood up to Scientology. I don't think it's just Scientology. I think it's all or a lot of high control groups. What do you think as a lawyer? Do you think more could be done to better understand and tackle these courts in the legal system? Does judicial change need to happen? Or, what's your thought on that?
That's a very big woulda, shoulda, coulda, woulda type
Yeah.
question. And I struggle with that because you have two competing philosophies here.
Hmm.
I don't want the court, I don't want the state to be in the business of dictating what is religious practice, what is religious belief, and what is organizational practice, organizational acts. Um, it gets very messy. And so I don't know. The first question is, should a policy like that exist? You have two competing theories here, right? The one theory says these people, individuals who are members of high demand religions, are individuals who are under duress, who are coerced, who are defrauded essentially into believing certain things that are simply untrue and that are not in their own best interest. And they sign up for it, though, as willing participants.
Hmm.
It's very difficult for the
Unless a
law.
second gen, someone has been raised in it, for example. In Scientology, there's lots of
Correct.
people who didn't have a choice. They've been raised in this group, right?
Correct. So that includes two different groups, right?
Yeah.
So because it's almost impossible for the law to make the distinction between the two. If you have two consenting adults, it doesn't matter to the law whether or not you were raised in the organization or whether or not you joined later. Essentially, both adults are being defrauded.
Mm,
They're both being fed lies that counteract what is in that counteract what they are legally entitled to. And it prevents them from seeking legal enforcement, okay? On the other hand, I don't want to live in a country where the state is monitoring what is going on in religious organizations, religious beliefs, and saying, well, this is a religious belief. That's a valid belief to have that the state shouldn't look into, and this is not. This practice is unethical or this practice is immoral. And so, ergo, I'm going to shut it down. Now, we already have the state stepping in certain cases. A great example of this is like food preparation, right? So there are certain food preparation laws that were used to target people who were practicing voodoo magic. And so, that was one of the ways in which they shut down these voodoo practitioners was to say, well, wait a second, you can't just be killing goats in the middle of the city, right? And the Supreme Court tends to lean in favor. They use what's called strict scrutiny to look at these laws and to see, okay, it's targeting one religion over another. Is it targeting religious versus non-religious? If it's religious, we're going to look at this very closely. But a lot of those cases are very, very fact specific It's already been played out. And it's hard to create laws or policies that address the individual civil rights of every member without also infringing on everyone's right to free practice of religion. It is very difficult to craft those laws. I don't know if I want the courts doing that. I don't know, like, let's say, for example, a great example are Moonies, right? You'll have people who are members of Moon's organization and they abandon everything. They leave their family, they leave no contact, all of that. And family members will go and literally kidnap their family members to bring them out and try to deprogram them. And they will get sued. And they should be, because that's kidnapping, right? It's just difficult. I don't have an answer, and I wish that I did. I'll be honest, Alex. I have wrestled this in my mind time and time again, because on the one hand, we're all adults. We get to make our own decisions. On the other hand, there is undue influence, and the threat of cutting off someone's complete family connections and all of that is very detrimental to the human
Mm.
existence. And so
I
I don't know.
I think for me, it comes down to the difference between belief and action, right? Like anybody can, you could tell me that you believe the grass is blue and the sky is green, right? And that's absolutely fine. You're wrong, but you're fine. You can believe whatever you want, and I can have my opinion about it, and someone else can have an opinion about it, and that's absolutely fine. That's the right to freedom of choice and freedom of belief. I think where the line needs to be drawn is where, if you think that the grass is blue and the sky is green, therefore anybody who thinks differently should be, murdered or treated in a different way, and you go ahead and do that. Or in Scientology, the policy is destroy, right? If someone is a critic of Scientology, the policy is you go and destroy that person's life, career, finances, and so on. That is, I think, wrong. And that's not a matter
Mm,
of belief. That's a matter of you
mhm,
acting upon those beliefs. And I
mhm.
think that maybe the legal system needs to make it clearer, like definition on freedom of belief and acting on those decisions. Because if you go and harass someone because they have a different belief to you, that shouldn't be allowed. But you should be allowed to have the belief that that's wrong. That's fine. But acting on it is where it then becomes illegal and harmful, right?
Yeah, I think that so from yeah, that's a unique perspective to have, because in your case that is a policy of the church, right? That's a
Mm.
policy of the organization, the harassment policy. I mean, our laws are very clear against harassment. If you're harassing, you're harassing. You can get a stalking injunction, you can get a protective order depending on how serious it is. And you can sue them for harassment, in the United States at least.
But with Scientology, the defense always comes down to this is a matter of religious doctrine and religious belief. We don't have a policy that says harass anybody. And the courts historically have gone, well, we don't want to touch this with a barge pole because this is getting into the realm of having to decide on whether it's religious belief or not. And we don't want anything to do with it. So we're not hearing the case. That's been the view of the court in a lot of these cases. So I think the question of like, whether the US court should be doing more or whether there needs to be change is like, if there is a clearer definition between what is belief and what is action, would that empower the courts to then be more inclined to step in and go, no, this is okay and this isn't?
I think it comes down to an individual fact pattern and individual
Right.
case. So you'll never have the court step in and say you can't be teaching your members that harassment is okay, or teaching your members that murder is okay, for example. Okay. You'll never have a court do that. What you can do, though, is if the members start to engage in harassment, you can target the members. The difficulty is following it back, right? Following it up the chain of command. And in your former organization, that is a much clearer chain of command than, and a very direct one as well. I wonder if you could bring a RICO claim. I wonder if you could bring claims against Scientology and go all the way up to David Miscavige. In Leah Remy's case, she can sue David Miscavige personally, because she has been personally harmed by him, right? So
If they can find him, sorry
if
to
they can
laugh,
find him,
but
okay,
this is,
can I?
you know
Okay,
about this, right?
yeah. So you've asked me a lot of questions. It's my turn.
Yes.
So
Sorry, go
okay,
for it.
where is David Miscavige? When was he last seen? Is this man alive? Is he like a head in a jar somewhere, just like Futurama? Like, where is this guy?
So Dave Miscavige will be either at their headquarters in Los Angeles or Flag in Clearwater, Florida. Now, I actually recently uncovered some news in the last couple of days. There is a huge Scientology event happening in the UK at the beginning of November, November 3rd till November 5th. And it's an annual event that thousands of Scientologists come and attend every single year, but it's been on hiatus since it hasn't happened in 4 years. 2019 was the last time it happened because all the events had to stop, obviously. So it's the first time they're doing an event internationally, and it's the first time basically David Miscavige will be traveling to the UK in half a decade because he was last here 5 years ago. So this is huge. And it means that David Miscavige will be getting on a plane at some point in the next 4 weeks, either from Clearwater, Florida, Tampa, the nearest airport, or from Los Angeles, one of the private airfields near there. And coming to the UK, he normally lands at Farnborough Airport. It might also be Biggin Hill. Those are two private airports that aren't generally accessible to the public. And he will be at St. Hill Manor in East Grinstead, if anyone's watching, 3rd, 4th, and 5th of November. So if anyone's trying to serve him legal papers, his whereabouts are known ahead of time for the first time in many years. But essentially, he's very good at escaping process servers because they'll show up at one of the many addresses at which he could reasonably be located. And everybody in the organization is going to do everything they can to protect David Miscavige. He's like the Pope. So even if he was in the room behind the door right in front of you, and someone walks in and goes, I need to give these papers to David Miscavige, he's not here. I haven't seen him in decades, is going to be the response because they want to protect him at all costs.
That's interesting. Now, have you heard of tag jurisdiction? Do you know what this is?
No idea.
It's one of my favorite legal concepts in the world. So typically, in order to have jurisdiction in a civil lawsuit, you need personal jurisdiction, meaning jurisdiction like location wise, okay? And you need subject matter jurisdiction, meaning you're in the right court, the court can decide the matter, the court can deal with the issue. So one way to get personal jurisdiction is called tag jurisdiction. So let's say that you have someone walking through the state of New York. Okay, so they land in an airport, they exit the airport. You can then have them served, or even on a layover, you can have them served at the airport, especially if it's a private airport. And boom, baby, New York can sue them. I think that's so funny. And you apply New York law depending, right? So that is so much fun. And I haven't taken a conflict of law class in a while, so everybody's going to come at me on that one. But I wonder who's going to tag Mr. David Miscavige and which jurisdiction they choose to tag him in. My guess it will be in the UK. This is a big risk to him because it sounds to me like, the UK is a little more stringent in its law enforcement as to some of these religious officials.
So are you saying it's possible, even though this is a US case, it's possible he could be served legal papers for this US case at the airport in the UK? Firstly, A, that's possible, and B, that if that was to happen, he may therefore be sued under UK law for the same things. Am I understanding that correctly?
It depends on the agreement, like the agreement between the United States and the UK. But
Right.
I think you'd have a really strong argument to keep him in the UK and to have the lawsuit be done in the UK because where else has he been? Right? We
That
can't
is
apply jurisdiction to him
huge.
anywhere else. Where the hell is he? And he has points of contact there. His organization does. So if you're suing him as the head of the organization, you can't just say, oh, well, Florida has jurisdiction because that's its nexus of business, or California has jurisdiction because of its nexus of business. You can also claim, look, I get to sue in UK, especially if you're a UK citizen. I think you have a really strong claim to apply UK law. If the acts that occurred against you were done in the UK, okay? If
So I'm
you're a
talking
member in the UK, you live there, and if he has nowhere else to have him served and to apply that jurisdiction, I think you have a good case there. But it's going to be annoying. It's going to be a fight, but it's possible. It's a fun
so
concept.
I'm talking specifically here about the two cases that are currently ongoing, which are American cases, American people, things that happened in America, and on board the Free Winds, which was in international waters, is their Scientology cruise ship. That's a whole nother story. But essentially, these are cases that they'd be trying to serve Dave Miscavige like 27 times in the US. Would they be able to serve him papers when he's here in the UK? And would that therefore mean, dependent on the agreement between the US and the UK, that he could be tried under the British judicial system,
Potentially.
even though
Especially if
there's
he's
nothing to do with UK in the case at all,
yes,
other than him?
especially
Wow.
if depending on what the agreement is obviously between the
Mm,
United States and the UK, if this occurred in international waters
mhm.
and you're having the litigant served here in the UK and that's the only place we've been able to find him, like I said, I think you have a really strong case for that. Now, is it very likely that the case will be removed to the United States? Absolutely. That's a very, very strong possibility. I'm talking like a 99.9% sure it will probably
Cool.
be moved back to the US. But which law you apply, I don't know. I would have to ask Legal Vices. He does maritime law and he deals with conflict of law issues a lot, I'd imagine.
Wow.
And so that's a question, right? So it's just going to depend, but it is
This is
interesting. It's an
huge,
interesting
Danny.
concept.
This is huge. Like, I don't think you understand the gravity of what you just said, because everyone was kind of shocked, and we kind of thought this is a bold move for David Miscavige to travel across the world and us to know it was a leak. We weren't meant to know that he was going to be in the UK. It's because I had insider sources that we found that out, and that was leaked. But still, it's a very bold move. And Mike Rinder, who is a former spokesperson for the church, he said on a stream yesterday, and he said in an article with Tony Ortega, a journalist, that David Miscavige kind of wants to make a statement to the public that he's not in hiding, and he is very much still at the helm of Scientology, and they're progressing and they're expanding and all of this. So it's a bold move. But what you're saying is there is a very real, legitimate risk
A
of
very
him
small
being
risk.
served. Yeah.
Small risk. I mean, at least they'll okay, I will tell you this, service will be effective.
Mm.
So he'll be served, and that's going to start the legal process.
They
And
just
that's
need to find they just need to find out which private jet he's getting and when, which is the hard bit, right? Because it could be any day. He could already be here.
yep.
Um, And there's, I don't know, maybe I'll need to look into the UK laws on whether they'll be able to serve him papers on private property in the UK. Because we know, I could tell you down to like the square meter where he will be, because he'll be on stage in the tent out the back of the castle at the big main, event on this at this time on the Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So
Someone
whether
can
they can
legally
do that,
walk up and serve him papers right there.
do
A
you have
process
to be a
server could legally
certified
go and serve him
process?
right there.
Do you have to be a certified process server to serve him papers, or can anyone get the papers and just go and give them to him? Like, could I
Anyone
go
who's
and
not
serve him
a
papers?
party, anyone who is not a party, who is of legal age, and who is not an attorney in the case can. Yeah.
So I could get the relevant documents, and if I could find my way to the event, I could go and walk up on stage and give them to him. I wouldn't be allowed
Under
on the
Utah
property, but
or under my
legally.
jurisdiction, yes. I don't know what the UK says.
Fascinating.
But yeah, I mean if you have a process server there in the UK, I'd have them served. For those who don't know, service starts the lawsuit. Service is what actually starts it technically starts with the complaint, okay? The filing of the complaint. But your filing of the complaint is bonk if you can't actually serve the guy. So a lot of people avoid service by moving every 6 months, moving every 3 weeks, and cuz they just don't want to deal with the lawsuit. So as long as they're not there, it's like they're not there, right? So
Yeah.
you can have him served personally and at least have that service be effective under US law if you just go and hand him the papers, have him sign it, or at least record the interaction and
Mm.
show the court, look, court, I've done everything I can do to affect service. Now, affecting service, if you have a good faith belief, if you can show the court, look, I've been trying to get a hold of David Miscavige. I've been trying to serve him these papers. Certain types of complaints can be served by public notice. So you can put it in a newspaper, you can put it on a periodical, and that will be sufficient to put the other party on notice that they've been served. And then if they don't respond within 21 days, which is your time to file an answer unless you agree to a longer period, if you don't respond in that time, you can get a default judgment against that litigant. Fun, huh?
Fascinating. This is so fun. This is why I love law and why I've really wanted to speak to you about this, because it's fascinating. I obviously need to go and do some research on the UK side of things, because you never know. There might be a law that says you cannot be served on private land, or you have to be registered or something like this. And I do not know, and I'm not an expert. So I'm going to go and do it. And there's also, bear in mind, there's no way anyone would be allowed anywhere near David Miscavige. He is under such intense security operations. To the idea of, I went to St. Hill Manor a couple of weeks ago with a drone to get some footage, and they literally have motion sensors and facial recognition cameras all around the perimeter of the property, and it's a fair walk from the edge of the property to where he would actually be. So it's highly, highly, highly unlikely that that would happen. But it's such an interesting idea. Sarah Wynn here says, I want somebody to take over the mic and say, "You've been served."
I have wanted to do that my whole life. I so badly want to come up and walk up to someone and be like, "You've been served," and then walk away. Like, I think that'd be awesome. For people in my chat, they're asking whether or not you can do that in a divorce case. The answer is not really. It depends is the answer. Whether or not you could bring that up in a divorce action, let's say in Utah with kids, it would be a little bit tougher. We do have a problem with people hopping jurisdictions. Now, you can have them enforce lawsuits. So, or you can have an enforcement order served against that person that way. So let's say, for example, that you, Rin, are already divorced and your ex skips town and moves to Tennessee. You can call the Tennessee service processor and say, "Hey, I have an order in my jurisdiction against this guy. Let's have him served with it, and let's get these writs of assistance to have everything brought back." A writ of assistance, by the way, comes from good old England. That's not a UK, or that's not a US development. That's you guys.
Yes, yeah. There's a lot of like little old terms like that that have come over from the UK, right? In US law that are still there. It's quite funny.
And the concept is
UK.
still the same. You basically pay the court a small fee and you're like, "Hey, come help me enforce this order." And the court says, "Okay."
Man, should we try and get through? There's some super chats here that have been sat for a
Of
while, and I
course.
don't want to neglect them. I'm so sorry. So this one was actually from a while ago. Free Xenu Project, thank you for the super chat. Danny, with all the focus on cults lately, do you see something in the future against cult behavior, much like they did against the mob regarding RICO cases? We mentioned this earlier, and this is actually something that a lot of people have asked me, and I think there's talks of whether it's possible of bringing the church down with a RICO case. Can you very briefly explain to me what a RICO case is? Because I understand that's how they got the mob down, but exactly how? And then, yeah, the question of whether that could happen with Scientology.
The best way of thinking of a RICO case is think of it just as I described it earlier, where you're just
Mm.
going back up the chain of command. Okay.
Yeah.
So everybody gets a little bit of liability as you go up, right? And you can tag people all the way up to the top. So you see this with terrorists in Guantanamo Bay. They won't just name the agency, the CIA. They won't just name the agents and the John Doe agents who they don't know about or who they're named, but you name the president, right? You name everybody down from the president. So, yes, I think that there is a chance you could RICO some of these. I think it gets murky in the United States, at least, where you have policies of harassment being part of the doctrine. That's where I think it's going to get messy here. But I do think it is possible in the UK, certainly.
Absolutely. There's another one here, Goosebump 801. This guy's posted Alex, who left Scientology years ago and now runs a website following the money to expose their many, many shenanigans. Thank you for the shout out. And I think I wanted to bring that up because my understanding is the most effective or convenient way of getting Scientology and high control groups like Scientology is following the money. It's financial crimes, it's fraud, it's moving hundreds of millions of dollars, for example, from the US to the UK through their Australian registered charity and then paid back with interest. These sorts of activities, am I right in thinking that's what's going to get the attention of the US authorities and would be easier to prosecute than the murky waters that are what is and isn't religious doctrine?
Yes. Non-disclosure and tax issues is a very quick way to get the US involved.
Okay. Fascinating.
Following the
Thank
money
you.
is smart. Following the money is always smart. Money talks much louder than victims, unfortunately.
Which isn't right, but that's the world we live in, right?
Yep.
And Harta on Fire, member for 4 months. Congratulations. Thank you for being a member. Does she get a little boop? Can one of my viewers
Yeah,
get a
of
little
course, of
boop?
course.
Because this is something you do on your channel and I love it. And I kind of want to implement it on my channel.
So one of the things we talk about is cults, and I've jokingly created my own cult, the cult of Laphrodite. I, of course, am the goddess Laphrodite, and whenever I have super chats or we get, members chats for members who've been here for a while, they get a boop. You can get a blessing or you can get a curse. Nobody takes me up on my curses. Apparently, everybody just wants blessings for themselves, which is actually a really nice thing. That makes me happy to hear. So my blessing to you and Hata on Fire is, let's see, the constitutional right to familiar association applied to Scientology disconnection. Ooh, that's an interesting question. And my blessing to you is that you will not be disconnected from your family to the extent that you are, that they will come around and that they will ingratiate themselves into your life once again, and that you two will build deep familiar relationships and be able to bury the hatchets of the past and truly heal from whatever trauma it is that you may have experienced together, whether or not you're a part of Scientology or otherwise. That is my blessing to you. And boop. All right, there we go.
Yes, we got a boop. Oh, I love it. Thank you so much.
It's
And
so
what are your
cheesy.
thoughts?
People give me so much crap about it, but I like it.
No,
It's
I
fun.
love it. I think the first comment I had on your channel when I was in the live chat was like, I did a super chat or something, and you were like, I had no idea this is what you did. And I was sat there going, oh, I got a boop.
It makes you feel good, and people
It
donate a
did.
lot of money and help us out. So
Yeah,
it's the
that's
least I can
true.
do.
What are your thoughts on the question? Are you familiar with the idea of disconnection, or do you want me to explain it?
I'm very familiar with the idea of disconnection. I'm not familiar with the right of familial association in the Constitution, but I am very familiar with the right of free association in the Constitution. Um, Unfortunately, there's just not a constitutional right to force people to be your friend or to contact you or to be involved in your life. Um, as a matter of fact, you have the right, as much as you have a right to associate, you also have a right to disassociate. And that's hard. That's really hard. And that's what I was talking about earlier, where I said it gets really murky in terms of constitutional rights. You know, the right of the family to say, nope, we think this is a immoral or evil person, and we don't want to have anything to do with them anymore. It's a
Yeah.
shame. It's a real shame. I don't know. I wish that there was some kind of protection there because it is just so devastating to families.
I wish there was a protection in place when it's done because you're under the influence of a coercive group, right? Like,
Right.
the disconnection was explained to me when I was in Scientology. It's like, well, if you were at school and there was a bully and he was being really mean to you, you wouldn't want to spend your time with that person. So you naturally would kind of, not go and hang out with them and not talk to them and stuff. That's what disconnection is taking power over, the bad things that happen to you and saying, I don't want anything to do with you because you're bad news for me, which is a concept, makes sense. But the reality is, when Scientology puts you in a position where you signed your life away to this thing and they say, either you continue doing Scientology, which is everything you believe in, or you disconnect from your mother or your daughter or your brother or whatever, because you cannot continue in Scientology if you don't disconnect. It's your choice, but that's the choice you have to make.
Yeah.
That's what I think is wrong. And that's what I wish there was more that could be done legally to prevent people having to make that choice. I don't think people should be prevented from making the choice of disconnecting or connecting, but they shouldn't be forced to make that choice,
That's the issue, is force.
Mm.
And what does force mean? Right? And you're not really being forced to make the choice. You can always choose out and say, "Nope, I choose my family. Peace." Right?
But that's hard when
It is
everything you
hard.
believe in, and maybe half your family are Scientologists and half of them are not, and you have to
Right.
choose which ones because if you subscribe to the doctrine, you cannot be associated with someone who's a critic.
And the same type of doctrine exists in my former religion.
Right.
And it is you are choosing between your eternal damnation or salvation, and whether or not, you know, you want to associate with these people and have relationships. It's immoral, but I don't know to what extent it ever should or will be illegal.
Mm.
And that's hard. It is. Because I mean, we make similar contracts in employment, for example. If you go and work for an intelligence agency, you inherently are agreeing to put your duty to your country above your duty to your family.
Yeah.
So it's difficult. I wish I had a better answer than, unfortunately, although immoral, not illegal. It's for the same reason that, like, maybe you and I will disagree on this point. I don't believe in, have you ever heard of the, what is it called? The Good Samaritan laws?
I understand what a good Samaritan is, but not the good Samaritan laws.
So it's a concept of, if you see someone in danger or in peril, you are obligated, legally
Oh,
obligated
it's
to
like that in
help or
France.
rescue.
I used to live in France, and in France the law is, right, if you like pass someone in danger and you don't help them, then you are personally in trouble. I think it's similar, or there's something similar in Canada, right? I might be wrong, but
Yes,
there's an
and in certain
expectation.
jurisdictions in the United States, we have similar laws.
Right.
I am not a fan of them. I think that it disincentivizes people from actually helping, because if you don't help correctly and you put someone accidentally in more peril, you're also liable for that, right? In a
Mhm.
civil sense. And so it's like, although immoral, I don't know if I want to make it illegal. And
Mm.
that's the difficulty, right? Because at what point do you draw the line? At what point do you say, okay, I mean, inherent in all religion, you're choosing God and principle and doctrine over your family. You're choosing
Mm.
God over country. You're choosing God over whatever it is you wanted to do, and you are constrained. There are inherent constraints in the concept of making deals with a higher being. The deal being, you created me, and as a result, and out of gratitude, and hopefully for some benefit or to be a moral or good person, I'm making this deal to abstain from XYZ thing. So it's tough.
I think it's particularly, maybe, I think where it's clear change is needed. What that change is, I don't know, and that's the question of like what is the change. But when you have an organization like Scientology, it's been going around for years, and there's multiple cases of harassment and of abuse and child trafficking and forced hard manual labor and all of these things, which are clearly very illegal.
Oh, that's
When this
easy. You can pin them on
organization,
those things, but I know
well,
exactly what you're
this is the
saying.
thing. It's been allowed to get away with this for decades because it has protection as a religious organization in the States. And I think that's where it becomes really clear that change is clearly needed, because there shouldn't it shouldn't have been allowed to be going on for so long. And so something needs to happen in order to empower the legal authorities to do something about it. But I get what you're saying is it's really hard, because where do you draw that line and then how do you do that? And I don't think there is an answer that you can give, but it's
I
it's
I
difficult.
do think that there needs to be greater oversight when it involves children and
Right.
minors. So
Yes.
you were mentioning before child labor laws. We have the same issue in almost any religious organization in the United States. We have kids who are participating in laborious activities. Well, how much of that is service and how much
Mhm.
of it is employment, right? And where does that line cross? I think that with children in particular, we could do a far better job of saying, look, I don't care what your religious beliefs are, no one on one meetings with adults and children where
Yeah.
you discuss sexual things, period. You at least need two adults there,
Yes.
preferably one of them being a parent, right? So there's certain mechanisms in the law that I don't mind in stating to protect children. I think it's very, very difficult though with adults. Does that make
Yeah,
sense? So,
absolutely.
a parent being able to refuse, let's say, an injection or a blood transfusion, I do think parents have the right to do that. However, However, the state does have an interest there in protecting the rights of the children because they can't assert their own rights. They rely on their parents to do that. And if their parents are involved in, let's say, Scientology, and they're saying, no, you will go and you will serve the organization and you will go sell these things, that's where the state has to be able to step in and at least observe the interactions with children,
Hmm.
at least some transparency about what is going on with kids in these organizations, because otherwise you're going to have another Jamestown. You're going to have another, you name it. You name it. Name me an organization and I'll tell you the freaking crime they've committed against
Yeah.
children. It's abhorrent that we allow this to go on forever and ever and ever. And just so you guys know, we're not targeting high demand religions or organizations in this discussion. That's across the board.
Mm.
That's across the board. You're looking at Boy Scouts of America, Boy Scouts International, uh,
MLMs.
USAID, the
Yeah.
UN. Name me one. Name me one. The Red Cross. Who
Mhm.
hasn't been involved in scandals involving the victimization of children? It's disgusting. So we need to do more to
Yeah,
protect kids generally, and that's where I
absolutely.
firmly believe the law can step in and have a role there.
Well said. I don't think you can disagree with that. And anyone that does disagree with that can piss off. We don't want you in the chat anyway. Uh,
Exactly.
do you want to read this one out? This is from Free Xenu Project.
Sure. Danny, when an organization, religious or not, changed the meaning of words for people in it to the point that changes their understanding of reality. Also, if that member goes to the authorities against another member, high crime. Yes, this is a huge problem. This is a huge problem. Again, it's the indoctrination to the point of silencing victims and prohibiting or preventing liability on the organization. I don't know the answer to that. I don't think the answer is in the law. I do think the answer is in genuine education. But governments don't have an incentive to educate their citizens on critical thought as it pertains to making clear and conscientious free choices, because the government doesn't want that either. The government, as a matter of fact, I'm willing to bet Scientology learned a lot of their programming from intelligence agencies and from what the government has been doing in terms of
That's a whole
propagandizing
different
citizens.
topic. Yes, there's we won't go into it now, but it's a whole separate video about Aaron Hubbard and his involvement in the MK Ultra intelligence community stuff that was going on, and his method um of auditing and training routines, which is some of the training you get in Scientology, being
Yep,
very close to mind control techniques that the US government were investigating and looking into at the same period of time. It's a whole nother
identical.
video, but there is a lot of correlation between L. Ron Hubbard's techniques and methods and the way intelligence agencies operate in the US.
Interesting. So is there a suspicion, or do you think that there's a pretty solid link there?
I'm pretty sure there's a solid link. They had communications. I think it's been proven that there was talks and there was an interest in what Oren Hubbard was doing. As far as I think we can tell, they rejected the idea, but there's nothing after that. So it's impossible to tell whether they just rejected the idea but stole the stuff anyway and went and did their own thing with it. I don't think there's proof he was actually involved in the development of mind control techniques. But my understanding is they took his work and then told him we don't want anything to do with it, it's rubbish, but then maybe took it and developed it themselves.
Okay, so now I get to talk for a second.
Yeah.
Well, I've been talking a lot, but I get to say one more thing. So Jim Jones, it fascinating, and I haven't even gotten to Jim Jones in my freaking cult review. I barely touched Jim Jones. So Jim Jones, he sought psychiatric treatment from the Psychiatric Institute in San Francisco. Well, at the same time, the CIA was operating out of there and doing MK Ultra experiments from that same institution. It's also similar to the institution, or at least in the same area where, oh, what is his name? The family.
Charles
Help me
Manson.
out. Charles Manson. Charles Manson, when he was put on parole, was paroled up to a parole supervisor in San Francisco who was a member of MK Ultra, very, very, very much a member of MK Ultra, and who was experimenting on LSD work in gangs. And so trying to figure out how you can manipulate drugs in gangs to try and decrease violence in inner between gangs. So that was the research he was conducting. And I firmly believe that both Jim Jones and
Charles
gosh
Manson.
dang it, thank you, Charles Manson, were likely subjected to experiments.
Well, let me
Whether
throw a
they
spanner in the works there. You know, Charles Manson was a Scientologist.
wait, what? Okay, hold on. Let me turn on the light. Hold on. Wait, what? Okay, go off. Tell me, teach me. What?
Charles
What?
Manson, I believe it probably doesn't line up. I think it was after what you're talking about. I believe it was when he was in prison. Actually, he was introduced to Scientology through one of their prison reform front groups, and he studied Scientology, and he actually did something like a couple of 100 hours of auditing using Dianetics and L. Ron Hubbard's techniques. And Scientology hate it when people bring this up because they don't want any association with him, and they go, no, he wasn't a Scientologist. But there are records of it happening. There are people who were with him at the time who've confirmed it happened. Charles Manson very definitely was a Scientologist at one point in his life.
I don't know why I have shocked Pikachu face about this because it lines up. I guess I'm shocked that it lines up so well.
And so the plot thickens, right?
I mean, okay, so here's the thing. Like Dianetics and the concept of auditing is exactly that's the exact trauma that they put Ted Kaczynski through when he was going through Harvard. And that was developed by that psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
This idea of not just auditing, but auditing in order to influence. So they would audit Ted Kaczynski for hours, and then they would take the most embarrassing pieces of it and show it to female classmates and have him watch their reaction. I mean, it's that kind of psychological torture nonsense that was subjected to Ted Kaczynski, and partially why I believe the US government tried to keep him as under lock and key as humanly possible. Because was he a terrorist? Yeah. But you have more access to the Boston bomber, I'd suspect today, than you would Ted Kaczynski before he passed away.
Martha here. Alex, Manson was with COS before he was with MK Ultra in the San Francisco clinic in the Height.
Really? Really?
We should do a whole separate video on this. I'll send you some stuff because a few people have done deep dives and know a lot more about Charles Manson's Scientology involvement than I do. I'll send you some content and let's do a separate video about it if you're up for
Let's
it.
do it. I would love
Yeah.
to. I mean, this is going to be a members only stream because I'm tired of Scientologists attacking my channel. I'm going to be honest with you, Alex. It's here's the thing. You and I talked about this, okay? I
Yeah.
want to be very clear. There are good members of every organization, and particularly these high demand organizations. These are people who are good at heart, who are very vulnerable, and who are preyed on by these organizations. And I wish I had a shirt that said, I'm sorry for all the things I said when I was a part of X organization, right? And you could just fill in the blank. Because
there is someone who in the SPTV community who has that t-shirt, by the way. I can't remember who it was, but I've seen it somewhere. There's a former Scientologist who's got a t-shirt that says, I'm sorry for everything I did or said when I was in a group or a cult or something.
Oh my gosh.
Great t-shirt idea. Yeah.
Wow. So yeah, I mean, just to be clear to everybody, when I say Scientologists are attacking me, what I mean is it's open season on me for the organization, because how dare I cover this case and how dare I talk about these things? And interestingly, my streams were demonetized by YouTube.
Really? No way.
The two Leah Remini streams were both demonetized, and they didn't give a clear answer as to why.
And did you appeal it, and was it upheld, or was it?
I haven't appealed them yet.
Okay.
They weren't huge moneymakers, so I don't particularly care all that much. I just found it interesting, and I wonder if they are hiding behind the whole, well, you're prosecuting you're persecuting me.
You know what Scientology like to do as just one of their dirty tricks campaigns is just report all of the videos, even if there's no basis for the report, just so that they get taken down or demonetized temporarily. And then they're manually reviewed and then they're put back up again because they're found to not be in breach of any community guidelines or whatever. But that is a tactic they have done before. So it's possible someone just was like, oh, you're talking smack about Scientology, report. And it just hasn't been human reviewed yet.
It's so dirty. That's so
Yeah.
dirty, and it's I mean, other organizations do this too, but yeah, I that is interesting, and I would love to have you on to discuss the MK Ultra connection there. But
Without
yeah,
a
my
doubt.
point is for the way that we cure this, okay, the way that we apprise people of their rights, make them fully fledged individuals making fully consensual decisions, is to ingrain in society this concept or notion that you have value as an individual apart from your group, and that you can practice and exercise critical thinking outside of what your leaders or what your authorities tell you to think.
Mhm.
And like I said, the government has it's contrary to the government's best interest to have a fully functioning society that's that independent.
Yeah. All right, let's crack on with some more of these stupid chats because I otherwise will be here forever. Because there's loads, like, it's mad. I'm so overwhelmed with all the support. Thank you, everybody. Casey McCloy, could a judge require mandatory arbitration, follow a certain set of arbitration rules like AAA or JAMS? This has gone completely over my head. I have no idea what this means.
The answer to that is yes, and it depends. It depends. So JAMS and AAA, the American Arbitration Association, is AAA. JAMS is the something arbitration, something something. So the concept is that yes, the court can require mandatory arbitration if that's what's in the contract. If it says it's mandatory and there is no other reason not to go to mandatory arbitration, yes, they can enforce that provision depending on the specifics of the provision and the specifics of the case. Sorry, broad answers or broad questions get broad answers.
So
I
I
hope that
think
helps.
so with regard to like the Scientology case that we were talking about earlier that's being sent back to arbitration, I think that was when this question was asked. It was like, can they
Oh,
force, instead of Scientology arbitration, can they force it be done externally? And you're
no.
saying no.
Typically, no.
Right.
Typically, no. If they're saying they follow these rules and this is the path, the court will assume that the parties knew and that they had an opportunity to object and that they consented to the rules as they were. If you consent to alternative process of things, you consent to those alternative rules. It gets really nasty and messy, and that's why the court says, "Yeah, you get to follow it. Sorry, follow it and come back."
Okay.
The difficulty I think would be if you are to go to Scientology arbitration, I could see them saying, well, we have the power to have all the powers to make up the powers as we go along. And we're going to find you guilty of XYZ thing. And that's our final ruling. Or we're too busy and we'll get to you when we have a chance. And that chance is 20 years down the road. That's where I see the fight happening after the fact. And I think you'll probably be able to get back into district court.
If they try and employ those sorts of tactics, they can bring the
Mm-hmm.
case back. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Fascinating. Tassie Devil, $5. Thank you. What about not letting people leave? Razor wire and spotlights, chasing people in a blow drill. I think this is relevant with what we were talking about earlier about the law, the line between what's legal and right and the belief and religious doctrine. Blow drill, just to give you context, is when someone is in the SEAL organization, dedicated their life to the Scientology, and they're working in like a compound or working in one of their headquarter, secret bases or whatever, private property. They literally have razor wire on the fences to stop people coming in, but also to stop people escaping. And they all drill these, like you have a fire drill or whatever, they have a blow drill, because when you leave Scientology as an unauthorized departure, you just say, I'm done, and walk out. That's called a blow, because you're blowing Scientology.
Sure.
So a blow drill is what happens if someone leaves in the middle of the night or tries to escape. Well, all the floodlights come on, everyone has a duty assigned to them, like you would have a fire marshal, that sort of thing in a fire drill. You have a duty to go to the nearest hotels and check if they've, gone there, or, go and check all the local train stations and bus stations. And everyone has their role to try and find this person to bring them back. And that is a thing that happens. And I think there's the question here is, where's the line between being legal and being a religious belief?
The line is not even that. If you're being imprisoned, okay, the line is how far up the chain of command can it go, right? So yes, you can have individual claims for harassment, for imprisonment, for kidnapping, for assault against each one of those individuals. But can you have it against the organization? The answer to that is where it gets iffy.
Right.
But can you have it against the individuals? Absolutely. Absolutely. And I would 100% encourage you to sue and call the police. Seriously, if you're trying to leave and people are literally chasing you, call 911 and say, I don't want to be here anymore. They will take you out of that situation.
It's difficult because as a Sea Org member, you aren't allowed to have a mobile phone. The only contact with the outside world you'll have will be through their internal phone system. And only until recently, you couldn't dial outside. If you needed to call 911, you'd have to go and speak to the operator, and then you'd have to explain to them why and get them to put you through. Now, I believe the phones in the buildings do actually allow a direct dial to 911. But again, you have to be in an office or in a room with a phone where there's obviously going to be other people. So you don't have the opportunity to say, I'm done, I need help, get me out. And
This
that's
is a
what
similar problem we have with kids in camp, right?
really,
Reformation camps where it's like,
right.
"Oh, you're a bad teen, now go hike in the wilderness and almost die," or actually die because you can't actually access help.
Mm,
That's a serious problem we have. And that's again where I think if we strengthen the laws for children, the
mm.
chances of that being strengthened for individuals is increased significantly.
With Scientology, there's I'm going to do a little plug here. There's an organization called the Aftermath Foundation, and it was founded by a group of former members like Aaron Smith Levin, who's growing up in Scientology, a big YouTuber in this sphere, Claire and Mark Headley, Blown for Good, and others, Amy Scobie and Matt Pesher on the board. They exist to help people escape Scientology. So if you're watching this and you're under the radar, or you know someone who's trying to leave, call the Aftermath Foundation, and basically what they'll do is help get you out and set you up with a new life. They'll get you a plane ticket wherever you need to go to reunite with your family. They'll pay for your accommodation. They'll help you write a resume and get all the things that you need to like set a new life up for yourself outside of Scientology. And they have really good links with the appropriate authorities. So if you are in a situation where you need to leave and you can't call law enforcement or whatever, call the Aftermath Foundation, because you can probably do that a bit more slyly because they've got like a normal US phone number. They will be able to then speak to law enforcement as needed. They can show up and get you out and help you as necessary.
And what is it called?
The Aftermath Foundation. Their website is theaftermathfoundation.org. Um, so go and check them out. If you need help leaving Scientology, they'll get you out.
I just included that in the video description. So if
Oh,
anybody
that's
needs
great.
a link, it's down there. I'm a huge advocate for helping people leave former high demand religions and organizations. If you want out, you should absolutely have the right to leave. That there should be no coercion, no pressure, no especially physical impairments to keeping you from leaving. That's a problem. Okay. You know you're in a high demand religion when you try to leave and someone literally stands in your way to prevent you from leaving. It doesn't matter. It doesn't it regardless of size. Okay. I don't care if you're from podunk nowhere. I don't know if you heard about this. There was a case of this church. I think they were in Georgia, I want to say somewhere in the South. And they were very evangelical. And there was this crazy lady who was the pastor, and they ended up beating to death two young men, or almost to death the second, but they did beat to death one of them. Um, and they would not allow them to leave. And so, and that's not unheard of or uncommon in high demand organizations, whether it's a group of 20, whether it's a group of 20 million. Get out, get out. If you believe your life is in danger, if you believe the life of those around you are in danger, get out and seek every legal tool and remedy available to you to protect yourself. And if you live in the United States, that's pretty easy. I'm packing all the time, right? Some guy comes up to me and starts threatening me. I'll shoot. I have no problem doing that. If I feel like my life is in danger and it's a credible threat, I'm going to take that action to protect myself.
I think
So
it's
for everybody out there who's going to come after me, just know
don't mess
I'm
with
not
Dani.
afraid. I will protect myself. I will
Yeah.
protect myself. I will protect those I love. I don't take threats lightly at all.
I think there's also, you got to bear in mind that, you know, different states have different laws on carrying weapons and licensing. And, you know, like in the UK, for example, it's a lot more difficult. And so you have to, you know, I just want to put that disclaimer in there, but you should
Sure.
absolutely protect yourself, and no one should be abused or harassed or treated badly. And I think with context of high control groups like Scientology, you know, you don't have the opportunity to defend yourself in a lot of these situations that they put you in. So that's why, you know, the police can help you, and also why organizations like the Aftermath Foundation exist. So yeah, that was a little shout out. Free Senior Project has another question for you if you want to read this one out.
Okay. Dani, my question was about RICO specifically. I meant passing new laws that deal directly with organizations using manipulative, destructive, and controlling doctrine. That's never going to happen. What will happen is if there was doctrine that's part of a crime and a criminal act happened, then you can follow the RICO all the way back, specifically with finance and fraud, which is why I say follow the money is the easiest and best way to get a RICO case. That's very strong. So organized crime in treating it as organized crime when a crime has been committed. So you're never going to get it based on just doctrine. It's a culmination of multiple things, right? So you saw this, actually, a good example is the Lori Vallow case, right? They weren't hiding behind religion and saying, well, everybody has unique and religious beliefs. Although the defense tried that for a second, it didn't play very well with the audience and with the jury. But ultimately, that can be used in court to say, look, there's a modus operandi here. They have a history of doing this. And you saw that in the Leah Remy case, right? She said, look, here's the doctrine. Here's how they operate. This is why I have a claim against the entire organization in addition to the individuals who are attacking me. And I think she's right on. I think she's right on. And I do think that the organization is liable.
What do you think will happen when, because I estimate Scientology's defense, they'll probably try and get her in arbitration, all that stuff as well. But when it comes down to it, they'll probably say, well, no, that isn't our policy. And two, that is a religious belief. It's not policy.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think would happen in that case?
I'm sorry, did you tell them that they can do these things and they should do these things? And then people went and did those things? And are you in direct control? This is where I think the claim against Scientology is much stronger than other organizations, because the chain of command is literally a chain of command. And that's where I think you have a really good RICO claim. I think where it gets messy is with organizations like the LDS Church, right? Where you do have a chain of command, but sometimes there's bad bishops, they're lay clergy, you know, they're not following the doctrine. That's their own interpretation of the doctrine. The LDS Church is much smarter in the way that it organizes its campaigns against former members or people who they deem as threats to the organization, in that they keep their doctrine very broad and their mechanisms for enacting that doctrine very broad. But if you said, let's say you had a mullah out there who's directing people to go and commit acts of terrorism, then yes, you absolutely have a claim against that individual. They're part of the crime syndicate at that point. You're directing, aiding, abetting, and encouraging that type of behavior. And so I do think at some point someone is going to bring a case against them. I think it's just going to be a battle of the ages. And I think people are very reluctant to that. I think that attorneys are reluctant to do that because it's high risk, high reward, but a lot of high risk and not as much reward as you would expect.
Mm.
Because let's say that you win in a case against Scientology, then what? How are you going to get paid? How are you going to enforce that? Who wants to have their name politically on that, right? You're going to be deemed as someone who hates religion for the rest of your life, which if you don't hate religion, or if you do hate religion, you don't particularly care, but that's going to influence and impact your availability, your
Yeah.
marketability as an attorney. I mean, it's your reputation, and it's an all-out assault, right? Like it really is fair game for these people. The fair game policy is terrifying. They're
Yeah.
not just
It's a
coming
career
after your
defining move,
license.
isn't it? Yeah.
You know, they're not just coming after you in court. They're coming after your license. They're coming after your family members. They're coming after your reputation, your employability in the future, your marketability, your perception, your public perception, your your gas line, right? Like I could easily see somebody calling in and saying, "Oh, I want the gas shut off and changed into my name," right? Like all sorts of disruptive behaviors that is really hard to pinpoint a single criminal act tied to that single individual. So
Mm.
it's very scary. It's very, very scary, especially if you have someone out there, God forbid, go commit a serious violent offense, okay, against an attorney or a litigant. That's terrifying. And there's a risk of it already. I'll tell you, one of the highest risk areas of law is the area of law I'm in, which is family law. Family law and public defenders, most high risk of death or injury by their clients or by opposing parties.
Wow.
So,
I don't want to get into a debate about gun ownership and so on, but there is a super chat here from Gun Club saying, not to mention Danny has a lot of friends who carry. So
yes.
don't
Yeah,
mess with
everyone
Danny.
I know carries. And thank you, the Gun Club. I appreciate the super chat. You're awesome, man. He's so cool. He sent me these really cool little flashlights and neat little ditties. He has a company called Valor Medical Services. So you guys should go check him out.
Awesome. That's
Yeah.
really cool. You guys can send me goodies. Well, actually, no, people can't send me goodies because I don't have a PO box or anything. But
Get
you can buy
one.
me coffee if you want to support my channel. You can buy me coffee. There's a link. Do you have coffee or anything like that, Danny? How do people support your channel?
If you just go to Dani Ahn Direct on Cash App, that's my username, and Venmo, Dani Ahn Direct, or you can donate through Super Chats, or even better, join, become a member. And you know, if you're really a true member of the Cult of Lafredite and you want blessings to just pour upon you like the windows of heaven open, and you want to experience the true joy of the doctrine of Lafredite, you will also get your friends to join. It's so simple and so easy. All you have to do is share one link, one link. What is your future salvation worth to you? Isn't it worth just one post? Isn't it worth just asking that one person? You have no idea. The joy that you experience as being a part of the member of the Cult of Lafredite, you can share with others. And as a matter of fact, you're selfish and immoral if you don't. So please
You would
join the
be
Cult of Lafredite, become a member, and share with your family and friends.
you are a great cult leader.
Oh, thank you.
Well, someone here has been a member of my channel for 4 months. I don't know if that counts under
It counts.
your thing, because Selena here, who's a big supporter of my channel, thank you, Selena. Can I get a curse? I'm feeling brave. 4 months,
Ooh.
yay. Is this your first curse that
Yes,
someone's asked
Selena, I
for?
need to know who I'm cursing.
So Selena is a follower of SPTV. She's a real popular engager in my channel and real big supporter. She lives in Wales, and I don't know how much she wants me to say publicly. She helps people. She's very charitable. She's actually a
Aw,
really down to earth person that's really helpful. So I don't think she deserves a
aw.
curse, but she's asked for it. So
I don't think she wants a curse against her. I don't curse people who give me money. I curse their enemies.
oh, I
Yeah,
see.
I curse enemies.
Okay.
I give people like
I thought you meant
hemorrhoid.
because you get a boop as in like a well done, or you get a curse like you get,
Oh
a
yeah,
shout
no, I have
abuse at
a
you or something.
ban hammer for curses. And I
Oh.
will curse people. Just put down in the chat. Is it the asshole who cut you off this morning? Was it the person who you're pretty sure spit in your coffee? Was it that woman who sent that super passive aggressive email to you from work that made you wonder whether or not HR was watching you? You let me know down in the chat, Selena, and I will send a curse their way. Or if you would like a delightful curse for yourself, please let me know. I would hate to curse you though. You seem like
I
a
love
wonderful
it.
person.
I totally thought that it was like you get a boop like a well done or a curse like a F you,
No,
depending
no,
on
no,
what
no,
you
no,
wanted.
no.
I
I know
see.
some
Okay.
people are real masochists that way, but I'm not.
Well,
Selena, you let me know who you want me to curse.
Selena here has replied, Yasmin.
Oh, Yasmin Begum, Yasmin. Please, she's trying to slightly destroy my organization. Grr. Ooh.
Ooh.
All right. Let's go, Yasmin. Yasmin, with the power of Lafrodite, I curse you that every time you go to get in your vehicle, you hear a sound in the engine and you go to get it checked. Time and time again, no one can diagnose it. And it gets louder and louder periodically. But every time you go to get it checked, no one hears a sound. And after a while, people start to question your sanity. That is my curse to you, Yasmin. Boom. There.
That's a great one. That would be so annoying. Oh
Would that
my
not be the
God.
most annoying thing ever?
You're good. I like that.
Some random ass noise that causes you concern, but only
Don't
you
mess with
know.
Dani. Yeah, don't mess with Dani. That's a good cut. Selena, I hope you enjoy that. That was a really good one.
The other one is like smudges on glasses. So like
Oh,
even after you've like dedicated yourself to cleaning glasses, there's always one smudge right where
and
you
it's
have to
always
look.
and it's always or it's in the corner right by the
Right.
rim of the glass, and that's like the hardest bit to clean, right?
It's
You
just
know.
enough to piss you off every day of your life for the next I make them time limited, like 3 to 7 months, because otherwise the curse loses its effect.
Right,
Right.
exactly. Selena, I love that curse. Fantastic. All right. Let's start wrapping things up. Danny, is there anything that you wanted to talk about or ask me or whatever that we didn't get to today? I feel like there's so much we could totally do another one, and we've probably come up with so many ideas from this of future videos. But while we're here now, is there anything?
What is the most destructive thing you learned as a member of the Church of Scientology? What has been the most destructive policy or principle that you had adopted into your life and
Mm,
truly believed?
that's a really good question, and I think I can give you two answers that kind of link into one, because it's not it started with like a practice or something that I thought was really destructive and horrible, but then that actually made me realize it was something else. So to give you an idea, I started looking at how Scientology is affecting me after I left. I left, and then it was 6 years or something before I then realized it was still having an effect on me. I was speaking to a friend of mine who was we were having a disagreement, and I realized in the moment I wasn't listening to what he was saying. What I was doing was trying to manipulate his emotions, because in Scientology you believe that you have a reactive mind and an analytical mind. And what you're trying to do is get rid of your reactive mind. The reactive is like, all the bad stuff, your traumas, when you're angry or upset, these unwanted emotions, you're trying to get rid of it. So if you're angry or upset, you're not thinking rationally, you're thinking with your reactive mind. So therefore, you're never going to come up with a solution to anything if you're not thinking analytically. And so 6 years after leaving the church, someone was angry. It's not because I believed in Scientology, I was actively applying it, but I realized I wasn't listening to what he was saying. What I was trying to do is change his emotions so that he wasn't angry and upset anymore, so that we could then rationally figure out what the problem was. And at that point, I realized, so I thought that the practice of manipulating emotions was bad, but actually, I realized the worst thing about it is it goes so deep in your mind that 6 years after leaving, I didn't even realize I was subconsciously doing something that was a Scientology technique. And that's what I think is the most manipulative, the most harmful thing, is how deep it goes in actually programming your brain to think and process information in a certain way. And that is has a long lasting effect. And that's what the real damage is to people's minds, because they don't even realize it.
Were you a convert to the Church of Scientology?
I joined the Church of Scientology as a teenager. Yeah.
What led you to be to get engaged. So
Mm,
not just to check it out, right? Because I've gone into a Scientology bookstore
have
and
you?
I've checked it out. Yeah, and I went, "Oh, okay, this is fun." And I
Yeah.
left. I do the same thing with the Raelians. I do it with everybody because to me they're all to me everybody is fun. I'm fascinated in everyone. So what point did you say, "Yeah, this is right. This feels." When did you feel right? When
Mm.
did it feel like, "Yes, I'm doing the right thing?"
So there isn't really a point where that happened for me because it was more like you just get caught up in it. I was a teenager. The org I was in, London, was very young. Like everyone was around the same age as me. I was 15. Everyone else working there would have been like 17, 18, maybe a couple that were 20, but it was very cool and hip and young and, so it was
Mm,
kind of a place you wanted to be. So it was like, here's a course you can do that teaches you about this thing or how people work or how people think. And you go, okay, great, and everyone's happy and everyone's on this united mission to like help the planet. And that's what did it for me. Was like, well, I was asking all those questions you have as a teenager of like, who am I, what am I doing in this world, what's my purpose in life? Well, here's a group of people who are all together as a community trying to achieve the same goal, and they seem happy and they're trying to do good things and help people. Well, I can get on board with that. And you just get swept up in it, and before you know it, I was a staff member and signing my life away to it because I genuinely
mm,
believed that this was the best way of helping humankind and helping the planet. Um, because you spend all day, every day with these people. So you very quickly, very easily become indoctrinated. If I'd stayed as a public and just done a course and gone in an hour or two a day or a couple of days a week or whatever, then I don't think I would have been as indoctrinated. But because I very quickly went to spending every minute of every hour of every day with these people, it then just became my life.
well, it sounds like you were really in a vulnerable state. You were young, right? You were in your youth. You immediately found a people, right? You found a community, and I'm sure that there were mentors in that community. There were people who you admired and looked up to. Um, so I'm sorry. I really am, because that sounds like a lot of time that you dedicated, um, that you may not have otherwise, knowing what you know now, it sounds like.
And you know what? Well, thank you for that. But I think also I had it quite lucky. Like I've got my experiences, my trauma and stuff, being locked in a room and all this stuff that I've talked about on my
Mm,
channel. We can go into it at some point, but in the scheme of things, I had a really lucky near miss, right? Because I was only in Scientology for a short period of time, and I ended up not arriving in the Sea Org, which would have been over in the States and so on. Like there are people who were raised in Scientology, who were in Scientology for 30 years before they were then able to escape, and they had forced abortions and forced hard manual
mm,
labor and all of this horrible stuff. And I'm not comparing trauma or anything, but I did have it good in context, right? There are
right.
people who have far worse stories than I do, and I think that's why I'm empowered to do what I do, because I've had a little taste of it that was not great, but I'm now in a position where I have a platform. I can talk about it, I can share experiences, interview people and so on. And if I can do a little bit of anything to help other people not go through that, because I wouldn't want anyone to experience what I would experience, let alone those other people who have had far worse experiences. So I feel like almost a duty to do what I can to raise awareness about it. And that's why I've got my channel, and that's why I'm doing Scientology Business, which is my blog where I talk about the money and all that sort of stuff mentioned earlier, and why I'm organizing a protest against Scientology at their big event. And maybe I will have to serve David Miscavige himself.
I would love to see that, and I know it's about 2 AM your time, so I don't
It
wanna
is.
keep you, but I do have to ask just one question here very quickly, because
Go
I
for it.
like I said, I perused the bookstore, but I didn't actually end up picking up any books or reading through them. Do you ha
Well,
did you
I
have a
was director of
daily
public book sales, so I can tell you exactly how to sell a book and so on.
so so was there a daily ritual type requirement? Because typically in high demand religions and high demand organizations, there are. So, like, for example, in a lot of faiths, you have to wake up first thing, say a prayer, do scripture study with your family. go about doing XYZ thing, memorizing some sort of mantra, and then going about your day and then repeating that process at certain times. In North Korea, for example, you wake up, you give praise to the leader, you sing the national anthem, and you get ready for your day and you're out the door at a certain time. So, did you have that sort of ritualism?
I think it's hard because Scientology is so personal. At the higher levels of Scientology, audit you do have to audit yourself, which is a whole other kettle of fish. But when you get to a certain level, you do have to do that every single day and multiple times a day. But you don't do that until you get to that level. At the introductory levels, it's more like you do a course on how to communicate better or how to live a happier marriage with, have a happier marriage or how to raise kids or whatever it is.
Or how to
And
be
you
a
have to,
great salesman? Looking at you,
yeah,
Grant Cardone.
Grant Cardone's a great Scientologist.
He's a great salesman.
Yeah.
It's funny because I say the same thing. Like people ask me, like, "Did you hate everything about being LDS?" And I'm like, "Absolutely not. Are you kidding me? Do you
Mm.
think that I would be so well spoken publicly if I wasn't forced to speak every Sunday? Do you think that I wouldn't be as extroverted as I am, or be as persuasive as I can be if it weren't for the fact that I served a mission? No. Like I'm not going to throw away the I'm not going to throw away the good stuff I learned. I mean, I learned Korean because of it. So,
Oh,
you
wow.
take the good with the bad, but
Wow, amazing. Yeah. But I think to answer your question, like that is true. Yeah, 100%. Like I've got the same thing. Like, I'm very outspoken and confident. I don't know whether it's because of Scientology or not, but I was one of the top Scientology salespeople. I'm now scared to be a salesperson because I know how good at it I am at it. And I was good at
yep,
it because I was manipulating people in the tactics. So I'm trying to navigate in my head, like,
the
how to sell
morality of it.
stuff to people without being, you know, manipulative. That's a whole different topic. But daily rituals was your question. In the most part, no. You commit to a schedule. You go in, you do the purification rundown. You have to do for X amount of hours every day. But once that program is done, for after a couple of weeks or whatever, you then do your next course, which will involve maybe spending 2 hours a day, studying a book or something. But you figure out the schedule that works for you. But ultimately, yeah, there's an expectation that you study Scientology scripture and you attend events and so on, with the view to being there as much time as you can. And when you're a SEAL member or a staff members are there from 9 till 6 or 6 till 10. There's two shifts, a day and an evening, 5 days a week. Or if you're the evening shift, you work the weekends as well. And SEAL members work 18-hour days. You work 7 days a week, 9 in the morning till 10 at night, at least. You work 7 days a week with no days off. There's no such thing as time off because you're like a monk or a nun. You're dedicating your life.
Right.
But
Well,
it's
and the
to the
world is
extreme,
is going to shit and you need to help save the
and
world
it
as much as
and
you
it
can.
needs to be done now. Yes,
Right.
you've signed a billion-year contract, and we've got the whole of eternity, but it needs to be done now, this
Right.
lifetime.
Right. The hurry up
So
and wait
no, you
mentality is a form of manipulation
yeah.
too.
So no, you can't sleep for more than 3 hours tonight because you have to do this and this needs to be done. And if this doesn't get done, you're thrown in the hole, which is the hard labor camp I mentioned earlier. Like
Jeez.
that's how they get their members and manipulate them, and that's why it's harmful. I don't have a problem with someone who believes in Scientology. Believe what you want, I don't care.
Right.
But the organization cannot continue to do the things that it's been doing because it's not right.
I 100% agree with you. And hey, Alex, before we end, I just wanted to thank you for being an advocate and for standing up and speaking for those who have gone through similar trauma, and who are now trying to escape or who are questioning. I'm with you. I wouldn't wish a faith crisis on anyone. I wouldn't wish a faith crisis on my worst enemy. It is so detrimental. It is so difficult. You are literally seeing for the first time. It's not an escape of the matrix. It's you are still very much living in the matrix and having to accept that nothing you see, nothing that you've been raised to believe is correct or is objectively observable or true. And that is devastating and hard. And it is hard to recoup your self worth and your self esteem, You feel like you will always be manipulated, you'll always be tricked. You know how easily people are susceptible to that. And it makes it very hard to function in life and feel like a functioning member of society and just an adult human being with autonomy. So I want to thank you and commend you for the hard work that you're doing in both exposing the acts of the organization and also in protecting the victims and those who want to speak out with you. So stay strong, brother. And I have the utmost respect for you.
Thank you. And likewise, it's without people like you, we wouldn't be able to do this. We have to have strong, independent women that fight for us and, know the law and, everything that you're doing, speaking to people who aren't necessarily members of high control groups or haven't experienced themselves to help them understand how these things work and explain the legal rights and how we can take down these organizations is really, really valuable. Not to mention, you've got your own experience as well that we didn't even touch in today's conversation with the LDS Church. So, everything you said right back at you as well. I'm not going to try and
Oh, thank
rehash
you.
it because you worded it perfectly.
Thank
But
you. Well, and it's on a spectrum, right? High demand religions and organizations are on a spectrum. I wouldn't compare the LDS Church entirely to Scientology. I think Scientology is a little bit more intense, in my
it's
personal
like,
opinion, and
yeah.
a little more money grabby than mine. But to each their own. But thank you, for
No
having me
worries.
on, and thank you for joining me. This is awesome.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the next one. If you want to stay where you are, I'm going to play the outro video and then we'll have a little debrief in a second. But Dani, thank you so much. Guys, if you're watching on my channel, go and subscribe. Dani's link is in the description. And if you're watching on Dani's channel, come and check me out. I try and be nice and have lots of conversations like this. And if you want to support our channels, Dani said she's got memberships, me, buy me a coffee. There's Cash App in Dani's description. There's PayPal, coffee in mine. But the best way of supporting is like, share, subscribe, all that sort of stuff. Anything to add, Dani? No,
No,
all good.
just stay calm, Dani Ahn. Love you
Awesome.
guys.
Thanks, guys. See you soon. Bye.